The Aspen Institute Corporate Leadership Award is presented to an individual whose leadership exemplifies dedication to the betterment of society. Here to present the award to this year's honoree is Jim Crown, Chairman of the Aspen Institute Board of Trustees.
Hello, I'm Jim Crown, Chairman of the Board of the Aspen Institute, and thank you very much for joining us for this year's annual awards program. Each year, our annual award celebration provides us with the opportunity to honor exemplars of values-based leadership and those who have made significant contributions to improving society. I'm privileged to present Ursula Burns with the Aspen Institute's Corporate Leadership Award. Ursula has been a trailblazing role model and a singular innovator. And she has done this not only while her industry was undergoing dramatic transformation, but also during a time of profound shifts in how businesses operate and how CEOs lead. The Corporate Leadership Award honors an individual whose leadership and dedication to the betterment of society exemplify the values and traditions of the Aspen Institute. Ursula Burns has demonstrated these values through her vision and her courage to take new paths on behalf of communities, stakeholders, and employees alike. Unquestionably, Ursula has helped redefine the role of the private sector in the 21st century, and in doing so, she represents the highest standards of corporate citizenship. What is so exciting about her accomplishments is that they represent evidence that values-based leadership and a commitment to the public good can bring extraordinary changes to the benefit of all. As many of you might know her personal story, she is the daughter of a first-generation immigrant mother who worked her way through school, earning a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Columbia University. She started at the Xerox Corporation as a summer intern and eventually rose to become a transformational CEO. And as many of you know, she was the first Black woman to lead a Fortune 500 company. On behalf of the Aspen Institute, it's an honor to present the Corporate Leadership Award to you, Ursula Burns, and thank you for being with us here for this event. And I now have the great pleasure of turning our program over to Ford Foundation President and longtime friend, Darren Walker, who will be interviewing our awardee.
Thank you, Jim, so much for that lovely introduction of our honoree, Ursula Burns, who is receiving the 2021 Aspen Institute Corporate Leadership Award. Welcome, Ursula Burns, and congratulations.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you, the Aspen Institute, for honoring me today.
I want to, Ursula, begin by just having you reflect, because your journey, the trajectory of a young girl from a working class background, raised in public housing on the Lower East Side of New York, you absolutely had some barriers and challenges to ascending to one of the great positions in corporate America. You were chairman and chief executive officer of the Xerox Corporation, the first African-American woman to lead a Fortune 500 company. I know that that journey was punctuated by many, many challenges, and yet you prevailed and you were truly an outstanding leader for Xerox. So let's talk about what it means to be a CEO, obviously as a woman, an African-American. What does it mean for you to have been the CEO of this company, and the impact that you sought to have in the world, and the way in which you led the company? Just reflect on that for a bit.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that I've spent the latter part of the past decade thinking about, as I've transitioned out of Xerox and have been placed in more and more a position of the first, right? Of this legacy leader who kind of paved the way for others. What I realize now is that, while I was going through my time at Xerox, I literally was just working. I was not thinking about legacy, or not thinking a lot about me, or even about Black people or Black women. What I was thinking more about was just getting the job done, and getting the job done in a way that anyone broadly can be proud of the job that I did, and that I could be proud of it as well. As I moved through and kind of got on close to the other side, I realized how big a deal this was, not only for me and for Xerox, but also how big a deal it was for people who looked like me and to people who didn't look like me, in presenting to the world the ability of people who look like me to be just a part of the tapestry of leadership. That's and to be a good part of it, right? So not to be this unique, phenomenal, bearer of all of the hope and dreams of the race or of the gender, but more to just kind of become ordinary. And so I've been trying to just be ordinary. It sounds ridiculous, but
but Ursula, you're not ordinary. You wouldn't be who you are if you were ordinary. And you certainly, as you say, you just sought to focus on strategy, on execution, on delivering results for shareholders and your employees and the communities you serve. But there were specific barriers. There were specific experiences. Yep. You, of course, write about this in your best-selling autobiography. You weren't just accepted. You were a Black woman engineer in a field, STEM, where certainly in the 1980s, as you were coming into the workplace, there were not many people, women, who looked like you. So talk about those barriers you experienced.
Yeah. By the way, I'm not trying to be overly modest, because I did something that I was the first to do something that's pretty spectacular in the world, and obviously differentiated in the world. What I was trying to do with the intro was to make sure that I kind of set the foundation of how I thought about it when I was living through it. I was looked upon as someone different. I was looked upon as someone special, but I didn't feel that way. I didn't operate from that position. I operated from the position of, this is who I am. The only thing I know is who I am. That's the context under which I operate and approach my job. And as I got more and more into the world, I realized how other people started to see me, and how both friendly people and not friendly people, and how therefore important my position was becoming and was. The thing that I had going for me, somebody told me when I was younger that I had 3 strikes against me. I was a girl, I was Black. This is what they told me: you're a girl, you're Black, and you're poor. And 2 of those things I can't change. And even if I could change them, I wouldn't. The poverty thing I would change in a minute, right? The thing that I had going for me was that I had an unbelievable foundation, and set by this amazing person who was my mother. I had an unbelievable and kind of varied support structure from all different places. Some places was the government when I needed it to get educational or funding support for my education, from white male business leaders who gave me a shot here and there, or at least gave me visibility here and there, from some of my best friends and mentors, people like Vernon Jordan, like Ken Chenault, like you, Darren, who said, this is a person who is probably worthy of the time and energy to get a shot. So I happen to have a great foundation, but I had I think the best and most important asset that I had was the fact that other people around me said, she's worth more, let's give her a shot. She's worth it. She's proven that she can do ABC. That means she may be able to, very likely be able to do DEF, right? So I had this unbelievable reservoir and wealth of people who looked at me and gave me a shot and gave me a break. I had the foundation of education, of hard work, of clarity of thought, of the ability to speak my mind, the bravery to speak my mind. I had that foundation to take advantage of the opportunities. But the combination of the 2 things were needed. So when I entered Xerox and started to run through the company, which was basically a whole lot of fun. There's a problem, there's a job, go do it. Okay, fine, I'll do that. I'll go do that, go do that, go do that. There was a point when somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, no more is this only for you and for Xerox. This is now a big deal. You're going to be on the public stage. So we have to ready you for that. We have to ready you to lead this company, to be a role model for our people broadly in Xerox, a role model for people who look like you and for people who don't look like you. So there was a point where it switched. And that point was when I started to really realize that all of this work that I had done up until this point, which I thought was just my job, was actually preparing me for something significantly more important than just leading a Fortune 500 company. It was kind of leading a movement, leading an opening up, a little bit more of an opening up of the world to allow people who look like me, who were not included, who were literally marginalized structurally, they're marginalized legally, they're marginalized in corporate America, for there to be a foot in there, in that little space, to realize that that's happening, that marginalization is happening across the board. But I really want to spend time giving accolades and giving thanks where it is due. And that's to all of the people, institutions, organizations who gave me a chance on a differential way when most people just looked at who I was, a Black woman with African-American features, who had hair that looked like this, who came from that environment, right? Single mother, urban environment, et cetera, and didn't say, oh, that means therefore she is X. She'll be a cleaner, she'll be a typist, whatever the heck it is that they compartmentalize people who look like me as. I was lucky enough to have assets around me, structural assets and friends and admirers and just people who help to say, nah, I think she has a little bit more than we can see, and let's give her a shot.
So let's talk about corporate America and what has happened in the last couple of years. Certainly the murders in 2020, particularly George Floyd's murder, changed in many ways, at least for a time, the conversation in the boardroom and the C-suite. We had, for the first time, serious conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion. And CEOs and boards were really, for the first time, I believe, genuinely engaged. Give your assessment, Ursula, of progress, whether the momentum is being sustained, whether the actions of CEOs, some were performative or not. How do you assess where we are in this moment, 18 months after the Floyd murder?
A lot happened in 2020. The thing that was probably the most formative for this conversation is the killing of George Floyd and the reaction, the visibility of that killing, the fact that we call it a killing. We actually say George Floyd was murdered by the police. In the past, there was all kinds of other terminology that we used, that other people used to kind of make it a little bit less dramatic than it actually was. So that time, what I saw happen was people driven by, some of it driven by their true hearts, some of it driven because their constituents, their employees, their communities wouldn't allow them to not react. But we saw a reaction by corporate America that was one of, hold on, let me make sure I understand enough about what's going on so that I can think about contributing to the solution. That's what we saw. And we saw some companies, some business leaders actually do more than just think about it, which is a big deal, by the way. Thinking about it is a big deal. But we saw people move beyond that. Even before they knew exactly what to do, they said, I'm going to do something. So I'm going to give money to causes like Black Lives Matter. I'm going to give money to foundations that work in this space. I'm going to hire more aggressively people of color. I'm going to fund businesses of people of color who start businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So we saw just everything kind of create a whole bunch of smoke and dust up in the air. Some of that dust has settled and turned out to be totally useless. But I think for the first time in my life, which is kind of long right now, I feel that we have reached a point where all of the momentum that we saw after the killing of George Floyd is not there. So it's not as aggressive as it was the day after that or the day of it, but the momentum is still there. And it's not going to be possible for corporate America to take the stance that it does oftentimes in these uncomfortable times, which is, let's just kind of lay low long enough and it'll go away. I don't see that anymore. I see now, after the big flurry, some people have just basically said, I'm not interested, or they're kind of going back to their old ways. But most of the momentum is towards, let's really think about building a more just, however people define that, a more just and inclusive world. But we are having the conversations today about how to have true action. So I am heartened by it, but I will tell you, if we take our foot off this pedal, I don't have any confidence, or I have confidence. If we take our foot off this pedal, we're going to lose the momentum. So we just can't. I mean, when I say we, I mean the believers, and the believers are not only people who look like me or look like you, they're believers across the world who say, yeah, a more just and inclusive society is better for us all. So let's kind of move towards that direction. So I think in 2020, a lot of bad things happened that came together. This pandemic, the killing of George Floyd, just an explosion of Me Too stuff that was going on all the time, but now it comes to bear, and a global awareness of the fact that there's something out of balance and out of kilter here that probably is not good for the world in the long run. So let's try to figure out a way to do it a little bit better. It's really not much more than that, and that is massive. One of the best things that has happened in the last couple of years is that business is no longer expected to be totally silent on issues that are of import to the world and to the future. We have to have a point of view. The place that this is that's coming out bigger is in ESG, the environmental side, right? But that practice that we're getting in the environmental side is going to spill over to how we effectively engage society as private businesses, as non-governmental agencies or non-governmental people, how we engage society from a power perspective, from an influence perspective. How do we do that for the good of the world versus for the good of me and of Xerox alone? All have to come together and figure out a way to lay the foundation for a better world, and it has to be done in partnership.
Well, it does have to be done in partnership, but if you are to really look at the recent activity around public policy discussions of pending legislation, let's just take voter suppression as an issue. This became a very contested issue among CEOs. As you know, our friend Ken Frazier organized CEOs. You were a part of this effort. It was not well received in some corners. I think they made really impressive gains, but it was not appreciated in many circles, and certainly many conversations I was a part of where CEOs might individually sympathize with those of us who wanted to see action, but say, exactly as you were saying in 2007, this is too toxic an issue for the company. And those companies who did step out in a big way were roundly criticized by certain of their stakeholders. So how does a CEO navigate today the complexity of leading a public company with a multiplicity of stakeholders, some of whom have diametrically opposed views as to the role of the company?
It is the yet to be well-defined question from a business perspective of, I think, the decade. It is, you defined it extremely well. There are points of view on many different sides. I think that when we are entrusted to lead an organization, that most of them have been around for multiple decades, some of them for centuries. When you've earned your right to be there, I think you've earned the full right. And that is the right to build on the culture and the values of the organization. Make sure that you understand what they are, what you're leading, to build on those and to apply the strength that you have in line with those culture and those values. No organization that I have been engaged with says that they're not for the right of people to vote in America. They don't, not one has said that every one of them say affirmatively, I'm for diversity, equity, and full inclusion. If you say that, right, and you're a business leader and you have been entrusted to lead an organization that has that as its values, you have to play those cards when it comes up. That's the way I feel about it. Now, I guarantee you people will say, well, you can play them in this field, but not in that field. This is that's up to you as a business leader and up to your organization, your board, that's what you talk about. But I actually think it's frightening to me if I sit in an organization that I'm employed in and somebody says, well, we really believe that voting is really part of the American right system, and we see it kind of being chipped away at, but we are not going to go there because some of our shareholders, our constituents won't like us. I don't believe that we can do that anymore. I believe that if we are aligned around, I know that there's nuance in this, Darren, I get it, right? So it's not as black and white as I'm making it sound, but that's why, we're paid all of the money that we're paid and we have advisors and board. You have to figure out your space, but you can't, your space can't be, I'm just going to be silent. I'm going to let whatever the negative effect of that happen, that's a decision as well. I'm going to let that go and just not engage. The reason why we did it is because we said on this issue, this is not an issue of race. It's showing up as an issue of race. It's a bigger issue. It's about who has the right to participate in America as a full citizen. That's what Xerox Corporation counts on, fairness there. That's what Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and all of the television things and the sneaker manufacturers, we count on that. And to be silent when that's being chipped away at, to me, is unforgivable.
One of the issues that emerged out of that period was diversity of the boardroom. And you and I both know that when there are more diverse boards, you are more likely to have diverse leadership, diverse C-suites, and as
diverse suppliers, diverse employees.
And though it all starts with the board, and it is no accident that your mentor, Vernon Jordan, was on the board of Xerox. No accident that Ken Chenault was mentored by Vernon Jordan, who was a director of American Express. There's no doubt Vernon mentored me. He was a director of the Ford Foundation. And there's no doubt that his presence had an impact on the diverse selection of leaders of these organizations. So what I have assessed in the past was that boards and companies were comfortable with tokenism. They were comfortable with one person. So you would see on a board one African American, one Hispanic, and maybe a couple of women. And that sort of profile was what the boards pretty consistently looked like. To my mind, that was tokenism, being comfortable saying we are diverse. I mean, writing in your proxy statements that we are very proud of our diverse board that has one Black person and one, that's not diverse. diverse is really taking seriously the convergence of talent and real diversity. And so let's talk about how you've been engaged with Gabby Sulzberger in an effort to address this through an effort. So talk about this board diversity initiative you have been leading.
Yeah, this is something, and I'm going to do something that you're probably going to hate me for, and just give you and Ford just a massive shout out here. I mean, I'm on the board of the Ford Foundation. I'm the chair of the audit committee of Ford. And I say this all the time when people ask me about my boards. I say the one that is the most mentally, intellectually challenging to me, the most intellectually challenging board is not Uber. It is not ExxonMobil. Both of them are very good. The most intellectually challenging board is the Ford Foundation board, because it gives me permission, or it puts me in a position where I have to deal with the realities of the world, but not from a perspective of they are set and done, but from the perspective of you have to be able to figure out a way to change them for the better. It's an action-oriented thought process. It's not about, well, let's just study it. Let's see. So what happened after George Floyd died is, you, Ken, whoever was in this situation. And then when I talked to anyone who's like us, they all got the same calls from our friends who I literally liked getting the calls from, but was a little bit annoyed after a while, who said, George Floyd is killed, and there's all this stuff happening outside. Can I talk to you about that? And after a couple of calls, actually after the second call, I said, why are you calling me? Why don't you speak? Thank you for calling me, but why aren't you speaking, or are you speaking to your board members who, and literally in a row, they said, well, I don't have any African-American board members. I said, what? So even the tokenism hadn't arrived in some of these companies. They have no African. I said, well, then how about you like somebody in your business leadership? I don't have any. That was when myself and Gabby and a whole bunch of others just said, are you getting these calls? Yeah, I'm getting these calls. How in the world do we have Fortune 1000, it doesn't matter, big companies that market to consumers, right? They're all consumers. They don't just market to white consumers. They don't market to white men. How can you have companies that have this much power who don't have any direct contact on a continuous basis with the people that they're marketing to, with the types of people they're marketing to? How is that possible? So we actually did a little bit of Gabby's really good at this stuff. She did a little bit of quick adding. Let's go start looking through. And what we found out was, surprise, surprise, of course, we kind of knew this, the number of boards that had none, zero, in the Fortune, let's say 1000, was a surprisingly high number. This is 0 Black people, 0 African-American women or men. African, I'll take even African, doesn't have to be African-American. It could be African, 0. There was a couple, there were more than 5, right, 100 who had none. And the number, and who had 0 in their C-suite. No, nobody. So they walk into work every day, they walk into governance meetings, they walk into thinking about social policy, about selling to consumers, and no one in the room looks like a large portion of the population of the world, particularly when you look at sporting goods, who was some of the people who called me. I was like, that's kind of surprising. What we decided to do then was just make a simple thing. I mean, it's Gabby, myself, the Ford Foundation, and Teneo helped us to kind of make sure we weren't kind of swimming in the dark without a lot of structural support. We just said, okay, we're going to do a simple start, really simple. This is not a report card. We're not going to, go blast people's name all over the place. We're going to do this thing called the Board Diversity Action Alliance. The alliance is, all you have to do is the following 3 things. 1, you have to have at least 1 Black person on your board. Come on now, it's not that hard. You have to have at least a token, right? Because and you're right, 1 is not, it doesn't show diversity at all, but none shows intent. None, in my opinion, shows intent to not be diverse. You have to have at least 1 of those. You have to actually start to think about having more than 1, and have Think about the other groups of people who are not participating in your board, Latinx people, people with disabilities, women, whatever it is, the world. Can you let some other people from the world into the board? Can you diversify your board truly? And can we start to talk about this publicly? Can we report this? It is amazing how little data there is out there available to all of us just to look in. We can tell the profits of a company. You can tell everything about a company. You can even tell how much waste they put out in the world. We don't have a central database, a central place where consumers, where community members, where government can look and say, my board is diverse or not. How does it look? And so we started this really simple thing, the board diversity action lines. The good news, we had a lot of people sign on, really good news. Yep, they're signing on. Most of the people who signed on in the beginning already had one. So it was like, no harm, no foul. But we also had quite a few people who didn't have any and who said, I need help. And this was where the conversation really started. We said, what do you need help with? I need help finding these people, which is an interesting idea. That means that you don't know any. There's not a natural way for these two communities to come together. We then expanded it from listed companies to VC firms and PE firms. This is the future of companies, right? This is where they come from, and getting those engaged as well. It's in this, the way I think about this for Gabby and I, this is a hobby that what we are doing is we are making this hobby into conviction in companies. We're not there to change a company's mind. We are there to help a company who has changed its mind. We have a company there to help a company who has an open mind to change its mind and to give it some tools on the path to having a fully diverse board. And then you get enough momentum in sectors of the business, which is what we found, oil and gas, for example, where diversity was lacking, where now you're seeing more and more and more diverse people on oil and gas boards for a reason, right? Because they were wholly bad at it in the beginning. They're starting to look to left and right, seeing some of the data themselves and go, oh, this is probably not a good thing. For whatever reason, it's increasing.
So as we close, Ursula Burns, I'd like you to share advice to the next generation of CEOs. What skills, capability, knowledge base, experience will they need to have in order to successfully lead and manage 21st century corporate America?
One of the most important things about leadership is to define the reality and give hope. So you have to define the reality and define hope. What does good look like? What's the real situation we are? Then you can build a strategy to get from where you are to hope. So defining reality and giving hope is one of the most important attributes. Think about how difficult that is. Like, you have to understand enough about the today, but also have resilience, compassion, empathy to think about. And I don't mean that even in business, right? All of those things, this grit to think about what good really looks like. I used to think it was things like, how many hours could you possibly, how I can carry the weight. I can carry the weight. I think I've learned now at 63, I can definitely carry the weight. It's not enough. It's not enough. And by the way, it's more than not enough. That alone is a formula for failure. This ability to see what the future can look like for your company, for the P&L of your company. It could be that basic, right? How successful, how efficient, how whatever the hell it is, how much of a great supply chain. Understanding that and then building towards that, this completeness and broad completeness of what good looks like, understanding that. So this idea of leading from an aspirational perspective is probably the most invigorating and eye-opening and value-creating perspective that a leader can have. One of the things I had to do before I became CEO was we had, crisis of always financial crises and in companies that I happen to be engaged with. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I had a financial crisis and I had to, one of the jobs was save $2 billion. Figure out a way to save $2 billion. And I remember I wrote about this in my book. I said, at the end of the day, this is going to sound ridiculous, but if all it was to save $2 billion, my daughter could have done that. She looks at all of the things you spend money on and you start to cut it. Right? Pretty straightforward. You say, well, we spend money on shoes. We're going to buy less shoes. We'll buy cheaper shoes. We're going to spend healthcare. We're going to buy less healthcare, buy cheaper healthcare. Parts. We're going to buy less parts. But that's not what the goal wasn't to save $2 billion. It was to make efficient, significantly more efficient, while delivering value, continuing to deliver more and more value, to fundamentally change the way that the business operated, that defined a new space to continue to deliver unbelievable value to our shareholders, to our customers, most importantly, to our communities and to our employees, and do it for less. The for less part is what we spend most of the time on. The other things around it, the other check boxes that you have to be able to check to have true success, is what the true leadership is about. It's about fitting it all together.
Well, Ursula Burns, you certainly personify true, exemplary, excellent leadership. And I know everyone at the Aspen Institute is thrilled, delighted, and grateful to you as you accept their annual Corporate Leadership Award. Again, congratulations, Ursula Burns, on this great honor.
Thank you so much, Darren Walker, and thank you, Aspen Institute.